Hi children, and welcome back to the next part of our story, George's Marvellous Medicine. Now, we left it last time partway through a chapter, and George had finally given Grandma some of his medicine, and she'd shot up in the air, she'd puffed up and inflated and then deflated again, and we'd left it at where George was wondering what next. Well, he soon found out. Suddenly, she began to grow. It was quite slow at first, just a very gradual inching upwards, up, inch by inch, getting taller and taller, about an inch every second. And in the beginning, George didn't notice it. But when she had passed the 5'6" mark, and was going on up towards being 6 feet tall, George gave a jump and shouted, "Hey, Grandma, you're growing. You're going up. Hang on, Grandma. You'd better stop now, or you'll be hitting the ceiling." But Grandma didn't stop. It was a truly fantastic sight. This ancient, scrawny old woman was getting taller and taller, longer and longer, thinner and thinner, as though she were a piece of elastic being pulled upwards by invisible hands. When the top of her head actually touched the ceiling, George thought she was bound to stop, but she didn't. There was a sort of scrunching noise, and bits of plaster and cement came raining down. "Hadn't you better stop now, Grandma?" George said. "Daddy's just had this whole room repainted." But there was no stopping her now. Soon her head and shoulders had completely disappeared through the ceiling, and she was still going. George dashed upstairs to his own bedroom, and there she was, coming up through the floor like a mushroom. "Whoopee!" she shouted, finding her voice at last. "Hallelujah! Here I come!" "Steady on, Grandma," George said. "With a hey nonny no and up we go," she shouted. "Just watch me grow." "This is my room," George said. "Look at the mess you're making." "Terrific medicine," she cried. "Give me some more." "She's dotty as a donut," George thought. "Come on, boy, give me some more," she yelled. "Dish it out, I'm slowing down." George was still clutching the medicine bottle in one hand and the spoon in the other. Oh well, he thought, why not? He poured out a second dose and popped it into her mouth. "Owie!" she screamed, and up she went again. Her feet were still on the floor downstairs in the living room, but her head was moving quickly towards the ceiling of the bedroom. "I'm on my way now, boy," she called down to George. "Just watch me go." "That's the attic above you, Grandma," George called out. "I'd keep out of there, it's full of bugs and boggles." Crash! The old girl's head went through the ceiling as though it were butter. George stood in his bedroom gazing at the shambles. There was a big hole in the floor and another in the ceiling, and sticking up like a post between the two was the middle part of Grandma. Her legs were in the room below, her head in the attic. "I'm still going," came the old screechy voice from up above. "Give me another dose, my boy, and let's go through the roof." "No, Grandma, no," George called back. "You're busting up the whole house." "To heck with the house," she shouted. "I want some fresh air. I haven't been outside for 20 years. By golly, she is going through the roof, George told himself. He ran downstairs. He rushed out of the back door into the yard. It would be simply awful, he thought, if she bashed up the roof as well. His father would be furious. And he, George, would get the blame. He had made the medicine. He had given her too much. "Don't come through the roof, Grandma," he prayed. "Please don't." Okay, next chapter is called The Brown Hen. George stood in the farmyard looking up at the roof. The old farmhouse had a fine roof of pale red tiles and tall chimneys. There was no sign of Grandma. There was only a song thrush sitting on one of the chimney pots singing a song. The old Wurzl's head got stuck in the attic, George thought. Thank goodness for that. Suddenly, a tile came clattering down from the roof and fell into the yard. The song thrush took off fast and flew away. Then another tile came down, then half a dozen more. And then, very slowly, like some weird monster rising up from the deep, Grandma's head came through the roof. Then her scrawny neck and the tops of her shoulders. "How am I doing, boy?" she shouted. "How's that for a bash up?" "Don't you think you'd better stop now, Grandma?" George called out. "I have stopped," she answered. "I feel terrific." "Didn't I tell you I had magic powers? Didn't I warn you I had wizardry in the tips of my fingers? But you wouldn't listen to me, would you? You wouldn't listen to your old Grandma." "You didn't do it, Grandma," George shouted back to her. "I did it. I made you a new medicine." "A new medicine? You? What rubbish!" she yelled. I did, George shouted. "You're lying as usual," Grandma yelled. "You're always lying." Oh my goodness, I thought she might be getting kind after the medicine, but apparently not. "I'm not lying, Grandma. I swear I'm not." The wrinkled old face high up on the roof stared down suspiciously at George. "Are you telling me you actually made a new medicine all by yourself?" she shouted. "Yes, Grandma, all by myself." "I don't believe you," she answered, "but I'm very comfortable up here. Fetch me a cup of tea." A brown hen was pecking about in the yard close to where George was standing. The hen gave him an idea. Quickly, he uncorked the medicine bottle and poured some of the brown stuff into the spoon. "Watch this, Grandma," he shouted. He crouched down, holding the spoon to the hen. "Chicken," he said. "Chick, chick, chick, chicken. Come here and have some of this." Chickens aren't very clever birds, and they're very greedy. They think everything is food. This one thought the spoon was full of corn. It hopped over, it put its head on one side and looked at the spoon. "Come on, chicken," George said. "Good chicken. Chick, chick, chick." The brown hen stretched out its neck towards the spoon and went peck. It got a beakful of medicine. The effect was electric. "Owie!" shrieked the hen, and it shot straight up in the air like a rocket. It went as high as the house. Then down it came again into the yard. Splosh! And there it sat with its feathers all sticking out straight from its body. There was a look of amazement on its silly face. George stood watching it. Grandma up on the roof was watching it too. The hen got to its feet. It was rather shaky. It was making funny gurgling noises in its throat. Its beak was opening and shutting. It seemed like a pretty sick hen. "You've done it in, you silly boy," Grandma shouted. "That hen's going to die. Your father'll be after you now. He'll give you socks and serve you right." All of a sudden, black smoke started pouring out of the hen's beak. Oh yes, I remember that happened to Grandma, didn't it? "It's on fire!" Grandma yelled. "The hen's on fire!" George ran to the water trough to get a bucket of water. "That hen'll be roasted and ready for eating any moment," Grandma shouted. George sloshed the bucket of water over the hen. There was a sizzling sound and the smoke went away. "Old hen's laid its last egg," Grandma shouted. "Hens don't do any laying after they've been on fire." Now that the fire was out, the hen seemed better. It stood up properly, it flapped its wings. Then it crouched down low to the ground as though getting ready to jump. It did jump. It jumped high in the air and turned a complete somersault, then landed back on its feet. "It's a circus hen," Grandma shouted from the rooftop. "It's a flipping acrobat." Now the hen began to grow. George had been waiting for this to happen. "It's growing," he yelled. "It's growing, Grandma. Look, it's growing." Bigger and bigger, taller and taller it grew. Soon the hen was 4 or 5 times its normal size. "Can you see it, Grandma?" George shouted. "I can see it, boy," the old girl shouted back. "I'm watching it." George was hopping about from one foot to the other with excitement, pointing at the enormous hen and shouting, "It's had the magic medicine, Grandma, and it's growing just like you did." But there was a difference between the way the hen was growing and the way Grandma grew. When Grandma grew taller and taller, she got thinner and thinner. The hen didn't. It stayed nice and plump all along. Soon it was taller than George, but it didn't stop there. It went right on growing until it was about as big as a horse. Then it stopped. "Doesn't it look marvellous, Grandma?" George shouted. "It's not as tall as me," Grandma sang out. "Compared with me, that hen is titchy small. I'm the tallest of them all." Okay, children, we're going to leave it there. The next chapter when we come back will be the pig, the bullocks, the sheep, the pony and the nanny goat. Oh my goodness, I wonder what's going to happen. I wonder if George is going to give the medicine to all of those animals. What do you think? See you all soon, children. Stay safe.